Welcome on in, ladies and gentlemen. It is our first live stream. It is Three Bold Takes. I'm Freddie. I'm joined by Chase and Quinn, and this is going to be interesting and fun here. First live stream for the college football playoff rankings. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. It should be a lot of fun just hanging out, chatting some football.
Oh yeah, I'm excited, man. This is something we've talked about doing for a while, and I'm just stoked to finally get to act on it. It's been goodness. We've talked about this since last year's national title game. I feel like so the fact that we've finally gotten around to doing it's going to be awesome. I just want this basketball game to end so we can start seeing what we got as far as the rankings go.
That's right. Quinn, you had a good point about whenever we started, it was about 3 minutes left in the basketball game, and Quinn was like, wow, this is going to be another 30 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially now that they've closed this to a 6-point game. Oh, man. But, guys, we're outside of it right now. So what are you expecting to see as far as the rank? Because I think my fear is we're going to see a complete disregard of wins and losses, if that makes or strength of schedule in favor of win-loss record. I'm not a fan of that. I think strength of schedule should be heavily taken into account, and I think we'll see how much they take strength of schedule into account based on two things. I think we're going to need to look at where Indiana's ranked inside of the top 12. If they're any higher, honestly, if they're any higher than 7th, I feel like that tells you right away that they are just focusing on wins and losses. If they are, because let's be real, who they beaten up to this point of the season? Indiana has a 1-game season, and that's going to be Ohio State.
Yeah, well, also have Penn
Yeah.
State as well. Same boat. Penn State was to beat Ohio State. If they went out, they're going to be coasting as well, a lot like Indiana. To see is maybe first week we're going to pull a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll start kind of getting more as the season goes on for the playoff rank. You see a trend of where they're just continuing like these guys are 8-1. The schedule restraint of record, it could start to be a disappointing from here on out, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting. I wanted to kind of talk about the whole Georgia situation. How far do they fall? Where do they go after an Ole Miss loss? I guess in comparison to where Bama is and where Ole Miss is, because I think the AP poll did it pretty good. So I'm curious to see if the committee members will actually kind of go along with the AP poll there and drop in Georgia pretty far. Miami too. That's another one. You had 2 top 5 teams lose last weekend. So, in Miami, their strength of record isn't really that good. Their strength of schedule isn't that good. So, where do they fall as well?
Look, I'm curious to see if we've got a single ACC team ranked inside of the top 12. I mean, one of them's going to get in.
SMU?
SMU's good, but do you think they're going to break into the top 12? I think they might be hovering at like 13th, 14th.
Somehow, I think Miami stays ahead of them. And then also this reward that they run with is kind of like BYU last week. That first pack Big 12 teams, and do they continue defeated? Will continue or rankings because of and seeing what they do there. That'll be very ends up tonight. I think if you're without Cam Rising, they beat them. So.
Yeah, still waiting on this State Farm Champions Classic to end here. It is now tightened up, 74-69 Kansas.
This was my worst fear.
Yeah.
with
I needed Kansas to
Kansas.
wipe the floor with them real quick. Oh, me. Now, where do you guys sit on? I was watching Late Kick earlier in the year, and he was saying that he thinks there's going to be 5 SEC teams in the final playoffs. Do y'all buy that at all? Because I'm sold on. I don't think that's happening. I think we have a for sure locked up. We're going to see Notre Dame stuck inside the top 12 unless they lose again. You got the G5 spot locked up. And you got the Big 12 and ACC champion. So that's taking up 4 of your 12 spots. That leaves 8 for the Big 10 and the SEC. And with all the one-loss and undefeated Big 10 teams, I don't think that we're going to see any of those 4 left out unless Indiana loses big to Ohio State. And then maybe they're left out of the playoff. But outside of that, I think you're looking at 4 Big 10, 4 SEC.
It's definitely going to get interesting because you're going to have a bunch of 10-2 teams, and whenever you look at the Big Ten, you've got Penn State there, who their strength of schedule and strength of record is, for lack of a better term, booty cheeks. They've had a 1-game season just like Indiana, right? Like a 1-game season, and they screwed it up, and so. Where do they fall in comparison to a 10-2 SEC team whose strength of schedule, let's say like Bama's, is what, in the top 15, 20? Like, how's that going to favor either the Big Ten or the SEC? So I think how that's determined will determine the number of teams, right? Do they value, the SEC like we've seen them do in the past?
Here's another question I got for you before we get in here. A thing I'm looking for. Where's Colorado ranked inside of the top 25? Because I think there's a possibility if we see BYU working their way up inside the top 4, top 5, and we see Colorado working their way up near 15, we could see 2 Big 12 teams in the playoff. Nobody's really talking about that, but what if Colorado beats BYU in a close competitive game in Dallas? All of a sudden, we might have 2 Big 12 teams in.
I don't think if Colorado doesn't win the conference, they're not getting in.
Oh, absolutely. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they beat BYU and win the conference bid, and that's BYU's first loss of the season.
Well, BYU's been flirting with disaster.
Oh yeah, but they haven't lost.
You're right. They haven't lost. So again, how do you value obviously it depends on how the loss is, right? Is it a close loss? Is it, a blowout, 10 plus points? That also plays into account. But I don't know. I did want to bring up Colorado too, because this year they've just been winning, right? Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Their only conference losses to Kansas State, who now is not really in the picture for the conference title anymore, barring a collapse by Colorado these last couple of weeks. So,
and then just to add to this, because I'm just pitching, look, I'm personally rooting for 4 or 5 SEC teams in the playoff. I think their strength of schedule is like stupid good, and they deserve to be rewarded for that. But if we want to add the nightmare scenarios, is you keep this Colorado barely beats BYU. That's BYU's first loss. What if SMU wins the ACC? Because now BYU also has a win over the ACC champion 1-loss SMU Mustangs.
mm-hmm. See, that's what throws a wrench in everything, is the fact that BYU and SMU played.
Yep.
And the fact that both of them are heading toward a potential conference championship kind of, or I guess both heading to a conference championship. And if one loses, how do you value that? That's a great question.
Yeah, all of this is stuff that obviously we'll start to get answers to here in just a second. Now that this game's wrapping up, and we should be getting into the rankings here soon. But it really just depends. Like if I see Colorado ranked down around 20, I'm going to start to think that if BYU loses that game, they're going to use that as justification to kick them all the way out of the rankings. But we'll see. And of course, none of it matters if SMU doesn't win the ACC.
That's true. So it looks like the show's actually starting now. Now that the game is over with, thank God.
All right, here we go. College football play. I didn't watch last week. I'm a little bummed about that. So this is going to be my first experience with this new format. Well,
it's a weird format the way they do it, and already have the the assumed matchups.
Yeah.
That I don't like that personally. Just to get on my soapbox real quick, I think it's dumb. I get it. It is a 12-team playoff, so you want to give hypothetical matchups, but it never ends up being what it is in the first couple of rankings. Heck, even the second to last ranking. So why are we talking about hypotheticals? We understand that you're going to get a home playoff game. Conference champions get a bye. We get that. So let's just talk about the rankings and not necessarily matchups that are fake.
Well, it also it throws a whole wrench in the whole thing when we could let's talk about this for a minute. There's a hypothetical scenario where LSU earns their way into the SEC championship game as a 3-loss team, upsets somebody, and then is one of the 4 teams with a bye. That is a thing that could still happen. It's highly unlikely, but it's possible.
Well, I do want to say this though. Keep in mind that the byes go to the highest ranked conference champion.
Yeah.
So if Clemson wins the conference, but Boise State's ranked ahead of them, Boise State gets the bye. That's
true.
what a lot of people in all of their bracketology, all this whatever talking about it, they always have Boise State or the group of 5 in the 12 spot. That's not how that works.
Yeah,
They're not guaranteed a 12 spot. They can get a first round bye.
Also, I think there's a pretty good chance that if Boise State wins out, they won't even be the 12 seed because they won't be the lowest ranked team in the playoff.
Right.
I think that's a pretty good possibility. I think they could be the 11 or the 10.
Something
10 seed.
That we pitched last Quinn. And what do you think about them losing in these next? Are they already kind of locked or in place that
I don't. You talk about Boise State as a lock?
No, the top 6 teams. They lose to Indiana this week at top 12, regardless if because they're so high up, 11 spots. And
look, I don't think anybody's necessarily a lock just yet. I think there's still too many potential variables in November upsets to say that somebody is a guaranteed lock. About the only team I think you could you could convince me is a lock at this point is Oregon. And it's simply because I don't think anybody on their schedule can beat them. So until they get to the Big Ten championship game, I don't think they're dropping a game. And because of that, I think they're a lock. But it has nothing to do with if Oregon goes out and somehow loses to Wisconsin this weekend, then now you've changed the whole get up. And now there is no Oregon lock. You know what I'm saying? So as far as Boise State, and this is something I want to point out to people too, because I think everybody's just assumed that Boise State is set in stone as the G5 representative. What if Army beats Notre Dame this weekend? I know that's highly unlikely, but if Army beats Notre Dame, wins out, and beats Navy, that's 2 huge resume builders inside of the month of November that's going to stick in people's minds. And I think it's enough to get them put in over Boise State.
There could be 2.
There could be 2, as long as they're the 2 highest, as long as they're ranked above a conference champion. And I'm looking at you, ACC, because what if Clemson somehow gets into the ACC title game, but also loses to South Carolina and then wins the ACC title game? That's a possibility as well. So the thing about trying to predict the 12-team playoff this far out in November is there's so many variables we've yet to see. Just think back to 2 Novembers ago. Who would have picked South Carolina to beat Tennessee and Clemson in the month of November in 2022? Nobody.
Very true.
So
even South Carolina fans wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, maybe the most hardcore South Carolina fans, but most of them would have told you they would have maybe beat Clemson just because they're delusional and it's their rivalry game. But I don't think I don't think they would have predicted beating Tennessee and Clemson.
Yeah.
Oh, they're sitting here explaining to everybody how the 12-team playoff is going to work.
Yeah, it looks like
Yep.
they're.
Come on, guys, just play college football 25. Get with the no. Oh my goodness! All right, so we got Tulane at 25.
Just like the AP poll.
Yep,
Not ranked.
Hey, that's really good. That's really good for Army, though. You got a team in your conference ranked. Army's at 24.
Army's at 24. They were at 16.
Yeah, that's this. I mean, you know, they
In
haven't
the AP.
played Missouri at 23. They haven't played the hardest American Conference schedule, to be fair. They've
Everybody.
kind of dodged a lot of the top end teams.
Ooh. 7.
Oh, LSU got punished hard.
7. So
Yeah, that's tough.
okay.
7 spots. LSU at 22. South Carolina up to 21. So you're seeing a lot of SEC teams hoarding the lower half of the top 25 here. South Carolina, Missouri is going to be huge. I think the loser is probably going to fall out of the rankings after this weekend. I think that's pretty much guaranteed. Seeing South Carolina at 21. How many? Oh, it just says they went from not ranked to 21.
That's how it was in the AP poll, too.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a good comment here.
23,
This is
then.
funny. LSU at 22. Roll Tide.
Oh man, yeah. Poor LSU. Clemson at 20. I'm very excited for the Palmetto Bowl at the end of the year. I think South Carolina might
Louisville
have
at
them.
19.
Hey, that's big for the ACC teams. Which now with Miami losing, their shot at getting 2 in though is kind of dead. I think. Shout out to Washington State, man. Quietly having a really, really good year over there in the Pac-2.
Pick them up. Somebody's got to pick them up.
Well, I mean the Pac-12 is re-expanding, so I think
I
they'll be.
I saw where that not is official anymore.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah, like some of the conferences aren't letting the teams out. All right, Colorado at 17. They jumped up 3 spots.
Okay, that says a lot to me. That says that what I was laying out before we saw these rankings is a possibility because I think if they keep winning, they're going to keep climbing the rankings.
3.
So
3 up or
we'll
3.
see. Man, that Nebraska loss is just hurting them more and more every week.
Kansas State ranked 16th.
Okay, see, there's another boost to the Big 12 in the rankings. So I think everyone's been focusing on the door for the ACC got shut. And so no conference other than the Big 10 and the SEC is getting multiple teams. But this is telling me that the door is still slightly open for the Big 12.
I agree. Texas A&M at 15. That's right where they are in the AP poll.
Yep.
No Clemson yet.
Yeah, we saw Clemson was.
Oh yeah, you're
20.
right. You're right.
Yeah, they were at 20. All right, now this is where I'm interested to see who's left on the outside. Are they going to go straight into like one down, or are they going to drop with the teams on the outside first? How'd they do that last week?
I didn't really watch, but it looks like they're going the team out, and then they're starting at 12, which again is Boise State. Goodness gracious.
So Boise State's ranked 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. They're ranked 13th, but they have the 12 seed.
Oh, because they're a conference champion or projected conference champion.
Georgia ranked 12 as the first team out.
Oh, that's big. So that tells me Miami is still solid. Okay, so SMU was ranked at 14, like I thought they might be. I didn't think that we'd see SMU break into the top 12 this week.
But Georgia drop
Close.
is insane. Like,
well, I mean, okay, is it because so they have the big win over
playoffs.
Texas, right?
Kings up. We haven't seen more than like 4 spots. One was alarming to me too. Teams is what I'm saying.
Like for me, like Georgia's got the one big win over Texas, but against a lot of the other high-end teams they've played, they have not looked good. I mean, they haven't looked good against low-end competition, if we're being completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
Ole Miss getting the what is that, 11?
11.
That's a little lower than I thought that. So the College Football Playoff Committee has Miami ranked a lot higher than the AP poll.
Yeah, the AP went at 12. They had Miami at 12, Georgia 11, Ole Miss at 10.
What this is telling me is they're just straight up valuing record. Like it doesn't matter what your strength of schedule is; it's strictly wins losses. That's what this is saying to me. Because for Ole Miss, and let me give my case for Ole Miss for a minute.
Alabama at 10.
Yep. See, there you go. Like it's what I saw a stat this week that Alabama has 4 wins against ranked teams, which is twice as many as anybody else. So, this is strictly based off of your total record, I guess, because I don't know. Ole Miss, what I was going to say about Ole Miss, they have not really trailed hardly ever all season. Like they fell behind to Kentucky late, and then LSU literally beat them on the last game or last play of the game. So Miami's ranked 9,
but they get the 4 seed because they're going to win the conference.
Which my issue with this projection or whatever is they're currently not the top seed of the ACC. So if you're wanting to project this like a seeding of the ACC, SMU should be sitting at 12. Boise State should be at 4. So Notre Dame is at 8.
Notre Dame at 8, Tennessee at 7.
Actually, Miami and Boise, that'd be a fun game.
That would be a really, really good game. Who would Boise draw though in this scenario? That's what we're going to find out.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess the 5 seed will probably be a Big Ten school, more than likely Ohio
Indiana?
State.
Penn State.
I'd say it's Ohio State, but we'll see. Because I think Ohio State, based on how the committee's been ranking teams, Ohio State will probably be like either the number 2 or number 3 team in the country. There's BYU.
BYU at 6 with them winning the conference.
All right, that's not a good look for the Big 12. When I was talking the Big 12 wanting to see BYU inside the top 5, they're still just outside of it.
Yeah.
So here's my question. So I'm struggling to understand what the committee sees here, because you've got Miami ranked ahead of the SEC teams with a much better strength of schedule and strength of record, assumably because they're a 1-loss team. But then you've got BYU sitting all the way down at 6, even though they're undefeated. And you got Indiana ahead of BYU, even though BYU's strength of schedule is better.
Yeah, because they have a top at this point, 14 win?
Yeah.
BYU does?
Indiana.
Indiana 5.
This hypothetical matchup has Alabama at Indiana, Notre Dame at Tennessee. Oh, we just got a question. If Georgia beats Tennessee, who falls out?
Georgia.
Georgia beats Tennessee. Ooh.
That's the question there. So Tennessee's that 7th spot, right? Or that 8th spot. They would probably fall out more because they're on the back half of the top 6. That's what I'm saying. The top 6 almost seems like locks. And with Tennessee being at 7, if they lost to Georgia, I think they would be at that. They'd probably be at 12 to where it would bounce them out of the playoffs.
My guess is it would either be Tennessee or Ole Miss, because I think at that point when you got a bunch of 2-loss SEC teams, you got to go based off strength of schedule. Like, I don't know how else you determine that. Like, they're all in the
Penn
SEC.
State at
They've all
4.
beat up on each other. Ole Miss, Penn State, rematch of last year's, what was that, Sugar Bowl that they met in?
Yeah.
So it's going to be Ohio State hosting Boise State, because your number 3 team is either going to be Ohio State or Texas, and your number 2 is going to be the other, and then Oregon's going to be the 1 seed.
And see, that's what I just don't like about Penn State. Had one job this year to beat Ohio State, and they're getting rewarded by not doing it. It's pitiful.
Well, I mean, yeah, Texas is at 3, which I agree with Texas being below Ohio State. Can we get that out of the way real quick? Texas hasn't beat anybody yet. Their best wins,
correct.
maybe. Okay,
Yeah.
but why is this not being held standard across the board? Indiana's ranked ahead of BYU despite playing literally nobody. I don't.
I really want to know what their explanation is for things like that, right? Like, I know that, and okay, here's another thing. The commissioner came out last week and said that conference champion or runner-ups in a conference will not be hurt, right? Like, they won't be dropped because they had to play an extra game and lost.
Okay.
I don't know if I like that. And my follow-up question for the group is, will they treat BYU the same as if Oregon lost in their conference championship?
See, okay, I don't think they will. And it's a good point to bring up. They were sitting there talking about playing the extra game won't matter. So you telling me that whoever the top 12 are, that's locked. And then the only way it changes is if an upset happens in conference championship week. And we're just going to bump everybody down based on that.
I don't know. That's just what he said. That but I don't think that that's possible. Like, how can you not hurt somebody if they lose? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid. The only reason I think that's even being brought up is because of this whole crazy SEC scenario where you got a bunch of teams that are basically tied, and one of them's going to have to play the extra game, and you don't want to de-incentivize the conference championship matchup. But
Ohio State was the first one out, by the way.
What do you mean?
Or
Like
the top 5. They were number 5. My bad.
Oh yeah. You're used to the 4-teamer.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Threw me off.
Yeah, Ohio, yeah, because they're the number 2. They're ranked number 2, so
Yeah.
they get the top seed. Yeah, see, I have another issue. You look at Penn State, Tennessee, right? What's Penn State's big win? Because I look at the schedule here. Tennessee beat Alabama, who is a top 12 team. Who has Penn State beaten?
Thank you.
Like,
you,
look,
Quinn.
Oh, we got to fight. We got to fight in the comment section here.
Oh, all about Tennessee. We got a lot of Tennessee hate/love here. But yeah, I agree with you, Chase. Like, look, I'm a huge Penn State guy. I've supported Penn State for years, but you had one major game on your schedule this year, and you blew it. Meanwhile, you got Tennessee. Tennessee's got an ugly loss, but are you telling me that a good win or a good loss is more important than an actual win?
Yeah,
because if we're comparing losses, Tennessee's loss is worse. You lost on the road to Arkansas.
Yeah.
Penn State lost to Ohio State.
Yeah.
But if you're comparing wins, Penn State has nothing to bring. What's Penn State's best win this season? The USC game, the Wisconsin game, or the West Virginia game? Which one do you think is their best win?
I think if the Penn State-Ohio State game was played out during the middle of the playoff rankings, Penn State wouldn't even be inside the top 12. I think after watching tonight and seeing how they dropped LSU and dropped Georgia with those losses, I think they absolutely would. Because that's Georgia's first non-Alabama loss since, 2019? And they just dropped them 9 spots.
Since 2020. They lost to Florida in 2020.
18 points, yeah, but it was your first non-Alabama loss. Georgia is still, if they find a way into the playoffs, I'm terrified to play Georgia. But To
Look,
see that if Penn State would have played Ohio State now, they wouldn't even be inside the top 12.
Look, I don't want to get on here and defend. There is one difference between the Penn State and the Penn State situation and the Georgia LSU situation. Georgia and LSU both got like destroyed. Like they were, especially LSU, they got destroyed. Those games were non-competitive. However, you have the Penn State game. They were in that game with Ohio State. They did what they always do, which is choke a lead in the fourth quarter and then blow a goal line opportunity to take the lead, and then Ohio State drains the clock out by running the ball. But it was a one-score game.
Yeah.
But then again, like you said, it's where are we getting to now? Where I think Penn State's best win on the season is their win over Wisconsin. Okay, well, you had an SEC team play Wisconsin on the road in Wisconsin and destroy them.
I'm geeking out in the chat, dude. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Well, sorry, Quinn. I think we kind of interrupted you, brother. Continue.
Oh no, you're good. I'm just now catching up on all this stuff in the comment section, and it's pretty great.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. But yeah, I think I'm just kind of sick and tired of allowing teams that play mediocre. And again, there's the well, you play the schedule you have, which is true. But at the same point, if you are barely beating teams or you're losing to certain teams, the only big team that you need to beat, you've lost to. Like, we're going to see it. It's going to be truly telling with Ohio State and Indiana next week when one of them loses, how far they drop in that game. But in the hypotheticals of that, it's like if Indiana stays inside the top 12 because they lose to Ohio State 27-24, then that's not fair when you've got teams that are like, because sports at the end of the day, you can have your statistics, you can have your notebooks with everything in it, but there's still an eye test that has to be determined. You still have to look at teams and be like, okay, they've played a pretty tough schedule. They've played really hard against these teams. They need to be. Penn State is not an eye test team. Miami, not an eye test team. BYU, not an eye test team. And a lot of these teams, and you're going to see it in the playoffs, in which it's going to create for a better whatever. No, you're still going to have some pretty mediocre teams because you have people thinking that they're better than they are because their record states it. And as we go on with these playoff rankings, I hope that they start saying, okay, they just like, how is Miami still inside the top 10 and they just lost a 5-4 Georgia Tech? Anybody explain that one to me?
Because it's their first loss. That's why they've left them inside the top 10.
Georgia just lost by 18 to the number 16 team in the country. Like,
it was their second loss, though.
But just
okay. I'll give you this. I think there's a lot of inconsistency when you let's look at just the ACC for a minute. SMU's at what, 14?
Yeah.
Their only loss is I think it's on the road. It might have been at home. It was way early in the season, so I'm not entirely sure. Actually, it was at home to BYU in a 4-point loss with their what is now backup quarterback starting during the game. That's their only loss on the season. And as far as strength of schedule goes, they both play in the ACC. It's not a hard strength of schedule. So you ask me who had the better non-con game. Is it Miami's win over Florida, who's fighting for bowl eligibility, or is it BYU in a close loss for SMU?
I want to share. We have a graphic. Jacob posed this question though: could Illinois be Penn State's best win?
I would
very
say
well could be.
Best, yeah, that's their best win.
Very well could be. I'm gonna pull up a photo of current college football playoff or chances for teams to make the college football playoff according to ESPN. And there.
That bugs me.
Immediately.
Indiana is at 93%.
Yeah.
Their strength of record or strength of schedule is in the hundreds. There's only 136 teams in the country.
93%, Quinn, and that's above the team they play this week at 92 or soon, and 92% Ohio State, which is insane.
I would say that's probably because they're factoring in their likelihood of them falling out if they lose. So they're saying if Ohio State loses, that's their second loss, and they're more likely to fall out versus Indiana falling out, taking their first loss. And I'm not trying to be an Indiana hater. I think the story with Indiana is fantastic to see a team who's normally trash be good. It's just, I don't know. It just feels like we've kind of just written in all these Big Ten teams as guaranteed in just because the rest of their conference is bad and they all just keep winning.
Yeah, I want to bring attention to Army sitting there at 26%, right up there with Colorado. So that tells me that, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, that there's about the same percent chance that Army beats Notre Dame and finishes the season undefeated as Colorado wins their conference against BYU.
That's what they're saying, yeah.
I don't agree with that.
I don't either.
I think Colorado has a very good chance to beat.
Well, they're also saying
BYU.
They're saying SMU only has a 38% chance. SMU's path is beating Boston College, Virginia, Cal. Okay, that's not hard. And then beat Miami in the ACC title game. That's their path. That's not a 38% likelihood path, which I guess when you compare it to some of these other teams that you feel like are lots, I think it's wild that Georgia and Tennessee are both like 73, 74. Yeah. Notre Dame took that tough loss to Northern Illinois, but it was all the way back in week 2. And I would say that their loss to Northern Illinois is nullified by their victories over A&M and Navy and soon to be Army. And the fact that they just have kind of won every single game they've played by double digits, except for that Northern Illinois game.
Now, typically I'm not like this, but Notre Dame has looked phenomenal since that loss to Northern Illinois. Definitely this past weekend, they just blew the brakes off Florida State. Whatever Florida State breaks that were left,
that's
they
not
blew
impressive.
them off. They were just gone. So, because typically I would say, hey, that Northern Illinois loss, like, even if they did win out, that's still probably not good enough for them to be in the college football playoffs. But Notre Dame has looked like a phenomenal team since then. I've got to say that. I've got to give them flowers.
Yeah, they've looked great. And I think as long as A&M keeps winning, Notre Dame's getting in the playoffs.
Yes.
I still don't know how they lost that Northern Illinois game. That's got to be the weirdest loss of 2020. Like, I think of all the weird losses in 2024, that's the weirdest one. Like,
it's a 2-point loss, right? Like, just like you said in week 2, against a team that you should statistically show up and dominate. So we've got somebody.
Hey, look, I mean, they don't play football. Like, that's why I said it like that. They almost got rid of their football program this offseason.
Hey, shout out Cal, though. They have traveled the most of any conference or of any team in a new conference. They've traveled to the East Coast 3 or 4 times so far.
They're also the only team to lose to Florida State. Like, that's,
They should have gotten Washington State rather than Cal, if we're being real.
Well, Cal's kind of like a tied-in package with Stanford. You can't get Stanford and not get Cal.
Isn't that a one? It's supposed to be like a 1-year thing, unless that, unless the big or the Pac-12 expansion is no more.
Yeah, that's what I was hearing. Is if the Pac-12 expansion goes through, they're talking about going back out west because the travel is just insane.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the only sense it makes. Definitely when it comes to recruitment. Because if you're a recruit and you're like, man, I want to play in the ACC, I can either travel 70,000 miles or I can just go play in Florida or on the East Coast where it's all right there. What do you decide?
I want to point out something. We had an earlier question about what happens if Georgia beats Tennessee, who falls out. And I'm looking at these percentages, and I think the answer is Ole Miss. which is just insanely unfair to Ole Miss. You beat Georgia head to head.
Ole Miss or Alabama?
It wouldn't be Alabama. I think
It wouldn't be Alabama because Alabama beat Georgia, who
but
would
they
then
also
beat
lost to Tennessee.
They lost to Tennessee.
I know, but wasn't the question if Georgia beats Tennessee?
Yeah, so Georgia
Yeah.
would stay in.
But if Tennessee beat Georgia, then I think Alabama would have a better chance of dropping out
Oh.
because Tennessee beat Alabama. But I'm saying
But
because
Georgia would have
Bama
3
beat
losses at
Georgia,
that point.
I know. I'm just saying in that scenario of the 3 teams, I don't think Bama would drop out if Georgia beat Tennessee like they're supposed to, right? Like these numbers are based upon favorites probably winning
Yeah.
from here on out. So you can kind of look at it that way.
The reason I don't think Georgia beating Tennessee would drop Alabama out or increase Alabama's probability of falling out is Alabama, out of every single team in the SEC that is in this whole like 2-loss discussion, has the hardest strength of schedule. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to push them into the playoff. They are sitting safe as long as they don't draw the SEC title game and lose, because I know they're saying that they're not going to drop a team out for a loss in the SEC or in their title game, but I don't care what the committee says. I got to see what they're going to do.
Well, and you're saying that, and let's say Alabama backdoors their way into the SEC title game, and then they're sitting at 10 or 11, and then they drop that game to 3 losses for the season. How do you not drop them a spot or two? Even if it's not a huge marginal drop, but like, hey, from 10th to 12th, and then now you're on the outside looking in because you have 3 losses in the SEC title game.
Where I think they're sitting right now, and the reason they said what they said is you don't want to and I said this earlier in the stream, but you don't want to de-incentivize going to your conference championship game. And your fear there is if you punish a team for losing in an extra game and then reward the teams who did not do as well in the season, you de-incentivize playing that extra conference championship game. Then you start looking at this messy scenario where conference championship games get eliminated altogether. You award a conference champion based on regular season results, and then these conferences lose out on all this extra money they make from their conference championship games. That's why. And I think specifically when they made that statement, they were talking about the SEC, because the SEC is the only conference that makes the insane bukus of money that they make off the conference title.
McLovin, this is a great question here. That would put Ohio State as a 2-loss team, losing to Indiana and Oregon, close loss to Oregon on the road, losing to Indiana, but beating a Penn State team that would only have 1 loss. So I think a 2-loss SEC team might be knocked out, considering where they're ranked right at this second.
I think they're certainly knocked out. I think at this point, what the committee's trying to do to try to appease everybody across the board is we have low fan interest in the ACC and the Big 12, so we'll put the conference champion in from those 2 conferences. Notre Dame gives us an opt-out, so they're going to get one of the spots. We're going to give a G5 team a spot, and then we're going to keep everyone in the Big 10 and the SEC happy by just saying your best 4 teams each are getting in. And we're just going to play it right down the middle, nice and even. That's what I think is coming down the pipeline there. And I think it's BS, because my counter to the Ohio State question would be the Big 10 is not as deep or as strong across the board as the SEC. Right. So if you're telling me you're going to leave an SEC team out who has 2 losses and a win over a good team because Ohio State has 2 losses and a win over a good team, that's not – especially when the meat of your schedule didn't hold up in comparison. But what I saw tonight and how highly ranked every single one of those Big 10 teams was, who the lowest ranked one was Indiana, was it not? And they were ranked like 5th. Yeah. So all 4 of them are in the top 5.
And there's not 4 top 5 Big Ten team programs.
No, there's not, but they're all ranked in the top 5. And so what that tells me is all 4 of those teams are going to the playoff. It does not matter what happens the rest of November. Yep. All 4 of those Big Ten teams are in.
Like, it's just, and they did prove me wrong tonight about dropping their teams, but it is just so hard to drop a team 5, 6, 7 spots, definitely if they're losing to a team ahead of them. So Indiana at 5, losing to number 2 Ohio State, you just don't drop 7 spots. Indiana beating Ohio State, you don't drop 10, 11 spots outside the play. I just don't think so. Unless they just totally revamp how they are grading their teams week to week, then it's just going to be really hard for any of those teams to be dropped outside unless they lose a couple of different games.
And I'm going to add this in. There's a group of teams I'm very upset with right now.
Uh-oh. Who is it, Quinn?
I'm looking at Iowa. I'm looking at Wisconsin. I'm looking at USC. I'm looking at, well, I would say Nebraska, but they're trash, and I had no expectations for them whatsoever. But I'm looking at that middle tier, right, of the Big Ten, the Michigan States. They're not holding up their end of the bargain. It's not a week in, week out. It's not and look, I never expected the Northwesterns and Rutgers of the Big Ten to hold up their end of the bargain.
I did.
I did. I mean, Rutgers for this particular season, but across the board, like, there's so many teams. Like, you look at the mid-tier of the SEC, it is way outperforming the mid-tier of the Big Ten right now. To a degree that I don't even know where the top tier and the bottom mid-tier of the SEC, there's no like defining lines to separate those teams.
I want to say this about the Big Ten. Looking at the current standings of the Big Ten, actually, let me pull it up here and show everybody what we're talking about, because it's astounding when you look at like where teams are in their respective like win-loss record, not necessarily conference, but overall. It's kind of astounding.
Yeah, it's like a crazy drop-off right after number 4.
Yeah, let me pull this up here.
Before you get it up, can I take a guess at who the 5th seed is? Because I just have a gut feeling I know who it is.
Yeah.
It's Iowa, isn't it?
Yes.
It's always Iowa. They're the best. They're the best mediocre team on planet Earth.
All right, here it is. Here it is. I don't know if you can see that. I can zoom in if need be.
Yeah, go ahead and zoom in a little bit. I'm having a hard time seeing that.
Let me see. All right, so once you get past the top 4, Iowa's 6-4, Minnesota's 6-4, Illinois is 6-3, and then every other team is not bowl eligible. I'm talking to you, Wisconsin. I'm talking to you, Washington, Michigan, UCLA, Nebraska, Rutgers, Michigan State, Northwestern, USC, Maryland, Purdue. Like, I'm talking to all of you. You suck. Like, you can't give any like a game to anybody. I mean, and honestly, I'm mainly disappointed in this Iowa team here, because at the start of the year they started scoring some points. At the end of last year they started scoring some points, and I was like, okay, hold on, wait a minute. Iowa may actually have an offense. Well, guess what?
They don't.
Their offense got a little bit better, but their defense took a step back, and it's disappointing. It's disappointing.
This is what I was talking about early on. I was ranting about it. Is we're rewarding these top 4 teams in the Big Ten like they are just playing the most difficult schedule on planet Earth just because they're undefeated or 1 loss, and we're not. Like, you have no signature wins. Like, I'm looking at Penn State, I'm looking at Indiana. There are no signature wins on their resume, and I have a feeling if Ohio State beats Indiana, they're going to drop Indiana way down. They're going to stay in the top 12. But they're going to have to go on the road in the first round, while Penn State gets to host a game in the first round, even though they're identical. Neither of them have a major win. They just have a good loss.
And the thing that I always hear or I see the banter from outside of the SEC, those fan bases, ACC, Big 12, Big 10. It's like, well, how's it fair to the SEC that they're just so strong from top to bottom while they're all like beating themselves up as well? But when you look at records and you look at teams, and again, the eye test, like there are a lot more 8-2, 7-3 teams in the SEC that barely get close to the top 3 or 4 teams compared to the Big 10, the ACC, and the Big 12. Like, of course, if it wasn't for Penn State or something like that, but Iowa sitting at the 5th spot at 6-4, and that is crazy, McLovin.
They've also scored more than Ohio State.
So you're saying this stuff, but when you look at it, you can tell the middle of the pack teams. Like, I'm taking some middle of the pack teams over those top 4 teams in the Big 10, and that's something that you just, or the SEC middle of the pack teams. My apologies.
Let me get on here and beat my little SEC drum for a second. You look at these middle of the pack teams, right? Wisconsin got absolutely slaughtered at home by Alabama. Michigan got absolutely slaughtered at home by Texas. UCLA got slaughtered by LSU. And then USC. USC is the lone example I can think of where they defeated the SEC in a neutral site game in Las Vegas on a Sunday night.
In week 1.
In week 1.
Yeah.
And that's why for everyone who's like, oh, they just bake in high rankings for the SEC teams to make it an artificial strength of schedule. That is a argument I have heard multiple times. The SEC dominates in non-con play. That is why they have higher rankings at the end of the day. There are 3 major non-con losses, or 4 major non-con losses I can think of. Florida got boat raced by Miami. That wasn't a surprise. Auburn lost to Cal. That was disappointing. Arkansas lost on the road to Oklahoma State. And then USC beat LSU. And all of those losses were close except for the Florida loss. And only one of those teams I mentioned is even a top-tier team in the conference. The other 3 are at the bottom.
Well, we're nearing an hour here, and we still have more content to record tonight. So we are going to say goodnight on this live stream, but stay tuned for the prediction videos for this upcoming week. Appreciate all you guys being here and watching, listening, commenting. We had some good banter in the comment section, so we really do appreciate that. Hope you guys have a great rest of your night. And who knows, we may see you again next week, or maybe the week after, or maybe the week after. It's been 3 Bold Takes. Don't forget, discount code over at SeatGeek, $20 off your first purchase. You can see the ticker at the bottom of the screen. Use code 3 Bold Takes at checkout to save you 20%.